Good morning and welcome back to my channel. Today we're in Chartwell. We're looking at Chartwell House near Tunbridge Wells. Please join me as we take a look around the house and the gardens. It's a site I've never been to before, so looking forward to it. Again, thanks for joining me. It's a very well maintained and looked after site, clearly, but being in Tunbridge Wells near Sevenoaks, it's probably going to be. So this way we've got a woodland walk, and the house and gardens are to the right, which I've got a ticket to get into around about 11 o'clock, so we'll have a look at that once the time comes. It's a really pretty site though, I must admit. Got some ponds or lakes or whatever they are over there. Well tended gardens for sure. It's pretty. You got a little stream there by the looks of it. Small waterfall. Runs down this tributary. Leads down into that large holding pond. Really old trees out and about. Not sure why after all these years I haven't actually been here before. I'll give you some insight into the site later. It's pretty. Stepping stones over there to a little seat overlooking a pond. Lovely tree. Get up to here, you got the house entrance, gardens and a studio to the left. Have a quick look in this gate at the walled garden. we'll come back to in a bit. We'll have a look round the gardens and the studio. That's really pretty. Pagoda. Beautiful tulips. And into this interesting room. And that's obviously Chartwell House. Interesting looking building. Beautiful gardens. Lovely view of the lake. Let's have a better look at the walled garden. And the house itself. gardens are looking nice with the apple blossom. Can make it up there on that kind of raised section. Tulips running around the edge of the wall. That's. I think we're still a bit early actually, so yeah. Let's take a little walk down to the studio. It's interesting little there we can make them out, little embroidered butterflies and what have you, hung on the tree. Not sure what relevance that is. Lovely to see the bluebells out. Beautiful blossom on these apple trees. Oh, actually, I don't think they are bluebells. I'm not quite sure what they are. Pretty. Still some daffodils. According to the sign there, look like they're Bramley apples. Looks like we've got another walled garden. Let's take a look. Wow. It's hit with the centre flowers. Looks like there's some beehives up on the bank there. You can see why Winston Churchill loved this place so much. Beautiful. So as soon as I walked into this garden, I got a real hit of smells. I assume it's from these beautiful tulips. Yeah, probably can't make that out, but it actually says the greater part of this wall was built between the years 1925 and 1932 by Winston Churchill with his own hands. Not a bad builder. They're bracing it now to keep it up, but I'm sure we've done a very good job. It's been up many years. And you probably won't make out, but it says the Rose Walk commemorates the golden wedding of Winston and Clementine Churchill, and was the gift of their children Diana, Randolph, Sarah and Mary, 12th of September 1958. This is the studio, but maybe we'll try and get in a bit later. I expect it opens late this morning, so let's make our way back up to the main house. We've got 11 o'clock. The origins of the estate reach back to the 14th century. In 1382, the property, then called Well Street, was owned by William Atwell. It passed through various owners and in 1836 was auctioned as a substantial brick-built manor. In 1848, it was purchased by John Campbell Colquhoun, whose grandson sold it to Churchill. The Campbell Colquhoun greatly enlarged the house, and the advertisement for its sale at the time of Churchill's purchase described it as an imposing mansion. Between 1922 and 1924, it was rebuilt and extended by the Society architect Philip Tilden. From the garden front, the house had extensive views over the Weald of Kent, the most beautiful and charming Churchill had ever seen, and the determining factor in his decision to buy the house. In 1946, when financial constraints forced Churchill to consider selling Chartwell, it was acquired by the National Trust, with funds being raised by a consortium of Churchill's friends led by Lord Cumrose, on condition that the Churchills retained a life tenancy. After Churchill's death, Lady Churchill surrendered her rights to the house, and it was opened to the public by the Trust in 1966. A Grade 1 listed building for its historical significance rather than its architectural merits. Chartwell has become among the Trust's most popular properties. 232,000 people visited the house in 2016, the 50th anniversary of its opening. The earliest recorded mention of the land dates to 1362, when it was sold by William Atwell. The origin of the name is the Chartwell, a spring to the north of the current house, chart being an Old English word for rough ground. The site had become built upon at least as early as the 16th century, when the estate was called Well Street. Henry VIII was reputed to have stayed in the house during his courtship of Anne Boleyn at nearby Hever Castle. Elements of the Tudor house are still visible. The Historic England listing for Chartwell notes that the 16th or possibly 17th century brickwork can be seen in some of the external walls. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the house was used as a farmhouse and its ownership was subject to frequent change. On the 22nd September 1836, the property was auctioned at Cheapside, advertised as a suitable abode for a genteel family. In 1848, it was purchased by John Campbell Colquhoun, a former MP. The Campbell Colquhouns were the family of Scottish landowners, lawyers and politicians. The original farmhouse was enlarged and modified during their ownership. By the time of the sale to Churchill, it was, in the words of Oliver Garnett, author of the 2008 guidebook to the house, an example of Victorian architecture at its least attractive. A ponderous red brick country mansion of tile-hung gables and pokey oriel windows. Churchill first saw Chartwell in July 1921, shortly before the house and the estate were to be auctioned. He returned the same month with his wife Clementine, who was initially attracted to the property. Although her enthusiasm cooled during subsequent visits, in September 1922, when the house had failed to sell at auction, he was offered it for $5,500. He paid $5,000. He made an initial offer of $4,800 due to the fact he felt the house needed rebuilding. The offer was rejected. The seller was Captain Archibald John Campbell Colquhoun, who had inherited the house in June 1922 on the death of his brother, Campbell Colquhoun. He had been a contemporary of Churchill's at Harrow School in the 1880s. On completion of the sale in September 1922, Churchill wrote to him, "I am very glad indeed to have become the possessor of Chartwell. I have been searching for 2 years for a home in the country, and the site is the most beautiful and charming I have ever seen." The sale was concluded on the 11th of November 1922. The previous 15 months had been personally and professionally calamitous. In June 1921, Churchill's mother had died, followed 3 months later by his youngest child, Marigold. In late 1922, he fell ill with an appendicitis, and at the end of the year lost his Scottish parliamentary seat at Dundee. Philip Tilden, Churchill's architect, began work on the house in 1922, and the Churchills rented a farmhouse near Westerham. Churchill frequently visited the site to observe the progress. The 2-year building programme, the ever-rising cost was escalating from an initial estimate of $7,000 to over $18,000, and a series of construction difficulties, particularly relating to damp, soured relations between the architect and client. And by 1924, Churchill and Tilden were barely on speaking terms. Legal arguments conducted through their retrospective lawyers continued until 1927. Clementine's anxieties about the costs, both of the building and subsequently living at Chartwell, also continued. In September 1923, Churchill wrote her, "My beloved, I beg you not to worry about money or to feel insecure. Chartwell is to be our home, and we must endeavour to live there for many years." Churchill finally moved into the house in April 1924. A letter dated 17th of April to Clementine begins, "This is the first letter I have ever written in this place, and it is right that it should be to you." In February 1926, Churchill's political colleague Sir Samuel Hoare described a visit in a letter to the Press Baron Lord Beaverbrook. "I have never seen Winston before in the role of landed proprietor. The engineering works on which he is engaged consists of making a series of ponds in the valley, and the Winston appeared to be a great deal more interested in them than anything else in this world." In January 1928, James Lees Milne stayed as a guest of Churchill's son Randolph. He described an evening after dinner. "We remained at the round table until after midnight. Mr. Churchill spent a blissful 2 hours demonstrating with decanters of wine glasses how the Battle of Jutland was fought. He got worked up like a schoolboy, making barking noises in the imitation of gunfire, and blowing cigar smoke across the battle scene in imitation of gun smoke." On the 26th of September 1927, Churchill composed first of his Chartwell bulletins, which were lengthy letters of Clementine written to her while she was abroad. In the bulletins, Churchill described in great detail the ongoing works on the house and the gardens, and aspects of his life there. The 26th September letters opens with report of Churchill's deepening interest in painting. Sickert arrived on Friday night, and we worked very hard at various paintings. "I'm really thrilled. I see my way to paint far better pictures than I ever thought possible before." Churchill described his life at Chartwell in the latter 1930s in the first volume of his history of the Second World War, The Gathering Storm. I had much to assume me. I built 2 cottages and walls and made a large swimming pool which could be heated to the supplement of fickle sunshine. Thus I dwelt at peace within the habitation. Bill Deakin, one of Churchill's research assistants, recalled his work routine. He would start the day at 8 o'clock in bed reading, and then started with his meal. His lunchtime conversation was quite magnificent, absolutely free for all after lunch. If he had guests, he would take them round the garden. At 7 he would bathe and change for dinner. At midnight, when the guests left, then he would start work to 3 or 4 in the morning. The secret was the phenomenal power to concentrate. In his study of Churchill as author, the historian Pete Clarke described Chartwell as Winston's word factory. Chartwell was mostly unused during the Second World War. Exposed position in the country so near the German-occupied France meant it was vulnerable to German airstrikes or commando raids. As a precaution, the lakes were covered up with brushwood to make the house less identifiable from the air. A rare visit to Chartwell occurred in July 1940 when Churchill inspected aircraft batteries in Kent. His principal private secretary at the time, Eric Seal, recorded the visit. In the evening, the PM, Mrs. C, and I went to Chartwell. One of the features of the place is a whole series of ponds which are stocked with immense goldfish. The PM loves feeding them. The Churchill instead spent their weekend at Ditchy House in Oxfordshire until security improvements were completed at the Prime Minister's official country residence, Chequers, in Buckinghamshire. At dinner at Chequers in 1940, John Colville, Churchill's assistant private secretary, recorded his master's post-war plans. He would retire to Chartwell and write a book after the war, which he had already mapped out in his mind, chapter by chapter. Chartwell remained a haven in times of acute stress. Churchill spent the night there before the fall of France in 1940. Summoned to London by an urgent plea from Lord Galt for permission to retreat to Dunkirk, Churchill broadcast the first of his wartime speeches to the nation. Arm yourselves and be ye men of valour, for it's better for us to perish in the battle than to look upon the outrage of our nation. He returned again on the 20th of June 1941 after the failure of Operation Battle Axe to relieve Tobruk, and determined to sack the Middle East commander, General Wavell. John Colville recorded Churchill's deliberation in his diary. Spent the afternoon at Chartwell. After a long sleep, the PM in his purple dressing gown and grey felt hat took me to his goldfish. He was ruminating deeply about the fate of Tobruk and contemplating means of resuming the offensive. Churchill continued to pay occasional short visits to the house. On one such, on the 24th June 1944, just after the Normandy landings, his secretary recorded the house as shut up and rather desolate. After VE Day, the Churchills returned to Chartwell on the 18th of May 1945. To be greeted by the horticulturalist and garden historian Stefan Buczaki, described as the biggest crowd Westerham had ever seen. But military victory was rapidly followed by political defeat as Churchill lost the June 1945 general election. He almost immediately went abroad, while Clementine went back to Chartwell to begin the long process of opening up the house for his return. It will be lovely when the late camouflage is gone. Later that year, Churchill again gave thought to selling Chartwell. Concerned by the expense of the running the estate, a group of friends organised by Lord Comrose raised a sum of £55,000, which was passed to the National Trust, allowing it to buy the house from Churchill for £43,800. The excess provided an endowment. The sale was completed on the 29th of November for payment of rent of £350 per annum plus rates. The Churchills committed to a 50-year lease, allowing them to live at Chartwell until their deaths, at which point the property would revert to the National Trust. Churchill recorded his gratitude in a letter to Comrose in December 1945. I feel how inadequate my thanks have been, my dear Bill, who were never wavered in your friendship during these long and tumultuous years. In October 1946, Hastings Plug Ismay Churchill, Chief of Staff during the war and a frequent guest to Churchill's own beloved Chartwell, recorded his chief's observation on the outcome of the Nuremberg trials. It shows that you get into a war, it's supremely important to win it. You and I would be in a pretty pickle if we had lost. In 1953, Chartwell became Churchill's refuge once more, when again in office as Prime Minister, he suffered a debilitating stroke at the end of a dinner on June the 23rd at 10 Downing Street. Churchill collapsed and was barely able to stand or speak. On the 25th, he was driven to Chartwell, where his condition deteriorated further. Churchill's doctor, Lord Moran, stated that he did not think the Prime Minister could possibly live over the weekend. The evening, Colville summoned Churchill's closest friends in the press, Lord Beaverbrook, Lord Camrose and Brendan Bracken, who, walking the lawns at Chartwell, agreed to try to ensure a press blackout to prevent any reporting of Churchill's condition. Colville described the outcome. They achieved the all but incredible success of gagging Fleet Street, something they would have done for nobody but Churchill. Not a word of the Prime Minister's stroke was published until he casually mentioned it in the House of Commons a year later. Secluded and protected at Chartwell, Churchill made remarkable recovery, and thoughts of his retirement quickly receded. During his recuperation, Churchill took the opportunity to complete work of Triumph and Tragedy, the sixth and final volume of his war memoirs, which he had been forced to set aside when he returned to Downing Street in 1951. Of his last years at the house, Churchill's daughter, Mary Soames, recalled, in the 2 summers that were left to him, he would lie in his wheelbarrow chair, contemplating the view of the valley he had loved for so long. Catherine Snelling served Churchill as one of the last secretaries. In the oral histories of a number of such secretaries compiled by the Churchill Archive, she recalled the dwindling number of visitors Churchill received at the house in his later years. They included Clementine's cousin Sylvia Henley, Violet Bonham Carter, daughter of H.H. Asquith, and a lifelong friend, Harold Macmillan and Bernard Montgomery. On the 13th of October 1964, Churchill's last dinner guest at Chartwell were his former principal private secretary Sir Leslie Rowan and his wife. Lady Rowan later recalled, "It was sad to see such a great man become so frail." The following week, increasingly incapacitated, Churchill left the house for the last time. His official biographer, Martin Gilbert, recalled Churchill was never to see his beloved Chartwell again. After his death in January 1965, Lady Churchill relinquished her rights to the house and presented Chartwell to the National Trust. It was opened to the public in 1966, 1 year after Churchill's death. Well, that ends our look around Chartwell House and Gardens. A really lovely place to come and visit. Could have spent a lot longer there, maybe the day, but there we go. We got around it, we had a look. I hope you get some idea on just how pretty the gardens are, and the house is really interesting. Find out a bit more about Winston Churchill and his family during the war years. So yeah, I'd highly recommend coming to visit. I really appreciate you joining me. If you could like and subscribe, I'll be really grateful. I hope you join me on the next one. Have a lovely day. Goodbye.